A single Instagram photo showed a man with his back turned, standing on a balcony overlooking a sunset in Bali. The same distinctive scar on his right shoulder, the one his daughter had traced with her fingertips as a child while he told her bedtime stories. It was impossible yet unmistakable. Dr. James Harrington had been declared dead 12 years earlier during a humanitarian mission to Sudan. Now his daughter was staring at a photo posted just 3 days ago. The discovery happened in Portland, Oregon, on a rainy Tuesday evening. Emily Harrington, now 28 and working as a trauma nurse, was scrolling through Instagram's suggested accounts when the algorithm presented a profile with no followers, but with a familiar silhouette that made her drop her phone. The account had been created only 6 weeks earlier, with just 7 posts, all from different locations across Southeast Asia. The discovery was accidental, a 1 in a million digital coincidence that would unravel over a decade of grief, lies, and unanswered questions. James Harrington was 42 when he disappeared. A respected trauma surgeon specializing in emergency medicine, he had volunteered with Doctors Without Borders for years, leaving his comfortable Portland practice several times annually to work in crisis zones. His wife Sarah had died when Emily was just 10, making James both mother and father to their only child. The mission to Sudan was supposed to be routine, a 3-week assignment at a field hospital treating victims of regional violence. On day 17 of the mission, the hospital was reportedly hit by mortar fire. 5 aid workers were killed, their bodies allegedly too damaged for proper identification. Dental records and personal effects were used to declare James among the dead. There was a funeral with an empty casket, a life insurance payout that funded Emily's college education, and a memorial plaque at the hospital where he had worked for 15 years. James was meticulous and predictable. Every morning, he would make pancakes shaped like animals for Emily, no matter how busy his schedule. He coached her soccer team on weekends and never missed a single game. At night, regardless of how exhausted he was from surgery, he would read to her from the same collection of adventure stories his own father had read to him. Adventures happen to those brave enough to leave home, he would tell her. His colleagues described him as brilliant but humble, the kind of surgeon who remembered the names of the janitorial staff and brought coffee to overnight nurses. His patients loved him for his calming presence and the way he explained complex procedures with simple drawings on napkins or scraps of paper. Before each overseas mission, he would leave a series of letters for Emily, each marked with a date to be opened if he was delayed in returning. The last batch of letters stopped after letter 5, and Emily had opened them all during the terrible weeks of waiting before the official notification of his death. Emily's hands trembled as she zoomed in on the Instagram photo. The account used the name Thomas Blackwood, not her father's name, but the bio claimed to be an American doctor working in remote areas of Southeast Asia. There were no selfies, no clear shots of the man's face, just glimpses. Hands holding a medical book with her father's distinctive writer's callus on the middle finger, a profile partially hidden by a surgical mask, and that final damning photo showing the scar. The scar that resulted from a childhood accident when James fell through a glass door at age 9, requiring 27 stitches and leaving a crescent-shaped mark that Emily had known all her life. What were the chances another American doctor working abroad would have the exact same scar in the exact same place? She immediately tried to message the account, but found herself blocked from sending direct communications. The profile was set to private, accepting no new followers with a minuscule digital footprint. A reverse image search on the photos yielded nothing. If this was her father, he was clearly hiding. But from what or whom? And why for 12 long years while she grieved him, graduated without him, and built a life believing she was an orphan? Emily took screenshots of everything before the account could disappear and hesitated over whether to contact the authorities. What would she even say? "I think my dead father is alive" on Instagram. Who would believe her? The first concrete step she took was contacting her father's best friend and former colleague, Dr. Richard Lowe. At 67, Richard was now retired from surgery, but still taught at the medical school. He had been like an uncle to Emily, checking in on her regularly since her father's death, helping with college applications, and attending her nursing school graduation. If anyone would believe her, it would be Richard. But as she showed him the photos in his book-lined study, Richard's face grew increasingly pale. "That's not possible, Emily," he said firmly, though his hands shook slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "I identified his personal effects myself. The watch, the wedding ring he still wore after your mother died, his passport, all recovered from the attack site. Was Richard's reaction genuine shock, or was there something else in his expression? Something like fear? The investigation took its first unexpected turn when Emily used her nursing credentials to gain access to the final official report on the Sudan attack, which had been filed away for over a decade. There, in dry bureaucratic language, was a detail never shared with her. While 5 bodies were recovered, only 4 were positively identified. The 5th was presumed to be James based on circumstantial evidence, but the body was so severely damaged that absolute identification had been impossible. An addendum noted that DNA confirmation had been deemed unnecessary given the conclusive nature of the personal effects. The report was signed off not by the expected UN officials, but by a representative from a private security contractor. Why had no one insisted on DNA verification? And why had Richard, who knew how thorough her father was about everything, not questioned this glaring oversight? What explanation could there be for a man to abandon his only child, to let her believe he was dead? Emily's mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Was her father running from something? Had he witnessed something he shouldn't have? Or was there a medical explanation? Amnesia, psychological breakdown, false identity syndrome. She remembered her father's occasional nightmares, the locked drawer in his office she was never allowed to open, the hushed phone calls that would end abruptly when she entered a room. There had been dimensions to her father she had never understood as a child. Had the perfect parent she remembered been hiding aspects of himself even then? 2 days after discovering the Instagram account, Emily found it completely erased, no trace of it in searches, as though it had never existed. Thank goodness she had taken screenshots, or she might have questioned her own sanity. This disappearance only strengthened her conviction whoever was behind that account was monitoring who viewed it, and her discovery had triggered its removal. If it was her father, he now knew she had found him. She decided to take a calculated risk. Using her own Instagram account, she posted a childhood photo of herself with her father, showing the same distinctive scar clearly visible. In the caption, she wrote only, "I know you're out there. It's okay. I just want to understand." Then she waited, alternatively checking her phone every few minutes, and then forcing herself to put it away for hours, the emotional whiplash exhausting her. The response came not through Instagram, but in a more traditional way. 3 days after her post, a postcard arrived at her apartment, bearing no return address and postmarked from Singapore. On the front was a generic tourist image of the Marina Bay Sands. On the back, in handwriting she would have recognized blindfolded, "Not safe. Tell no one. J." Just 3 words and an initial, but they changed everything. Her father was alive. He had seen her message. He was acknowledging her, and he was afraid. Richard's reaction to the postcard was unexpected. When Emily showed it to him, thinking he would share her shock and relief, his face hardened. "This is cruel, Emily. Someone is playing a horrible trick on you. Who else did you tell about the Instagram account?" When she admitted she had also mentioned it to her father's former nurse, Janet, Richard became agitated. "You need to stop this. You're reopening wounds that took years to heal. James is gone. Whoever is doing this is manipulating your grief." He tried to take the postcard from her, claiming he would have it analyzed, but Emily pulled it back. Something in his insistence felt wrong. That night, she installed a new deadbolt on her apartment door. The first major breakthrough came when Emily contacted Doctors Without Borders directly. Initially reluctant to discuss a decade-old case, they eventually connected her with a logistics coordinator who had been in Sudan during that time. The coordinator, now working in their Geneva office, remembered the incident clearly. It had been one of their worst losses of medical personnel in a single attack. But what he shared next changed everything. The strange thing was, when we sent a team back to recover additional personal effects 2 days after the attack, your father's medical bag was missing. Everything else was still there in the ruins, but his distinctive leather medical kit, the one with his initials embossed on it, that was gone. We assumed looters, of course, but it was odd that nothing else of value was taken. Emily knew that bag well. It had been a gift from her mother before she died, hand-tooled Italian leather with JTH monogrammed on the flap. James had treasured it. If looters had been present, why take only that and nothing else? Unless the bag hadn't been there during the attack at all, unless James himself had taken it when he left. The coordinator shared one more detail. A local driver reported seeing a Western man, matching James's description, boarding a private charter plane at a small airstrip 30 miles from the hospital, approximately 6 hours after the attack. The report had been filed but dismissed as unreliable at the time, as all medical personnel had been accounted for, either evacuated with the wounded or among the confirmed dead. As Emily dug deeper, more inconsistencies emerged. The life insurance policy that paid out had been updated just 3 months before her father's final mission, increasing the benefit substantially. The beneficiary was listed as a trust for Emily with Richard Lowe as trustee, a change from the previous policy which had named Emily directly. This meant Richard had been controlling the funds all along, doling out money for her education and living expenses. He had always been transparent about the finances, providing detailed accountings, but this arrangement had given him visibility into her life that she had never questioned until now. 12 days after finding the Instagram account, Emily received an anonymous email sent through a secure encryption service. It contained a single set of GPS coordinates in northern Thailand and a date, 1 week in the future. No text, no explanation, just a time and place for what could only be a meeting. She knew it was probably reckless, potentially dangerous, but there was never any question about whether she would go. This was her father, or someone who knew what had happened to him. Either way, it was the closest she had come to answers in 12 years. Emily told no one about the email or her travel plans, instead creating a cover story about visiting a nursing school friend in San Francisco. She withdrew cash rather than using credit cards that could be traced, and booked her flight to Bangkok through a virtual private network. If Richard was somehow involved in whatever had happened, she couldn't risk him discovering her plans. She packed lightly. A small backpack with essentials, her passport, and the last photo taken of her and her father together before his final mission. She also brought something she had found in her father's belongings after his death, a small key she had never known the purpose of, attached to a leather fob with a distinctive double-cross symbol embossed into it. The coordinates led her to a small medical clinic on the outskirts of Chiang Rai, near the Golden Triangle, where Thailand, Laos, and Myanmar meet. The facility looked modest but well-maintained, with a hand-painted sign in Thai, English, and Burmese. When she arrived, a local nurse greeted her in accented but clear English. "You must be the American doctor's daughter. He said you would come." Emily's heart pounded as she was led through a simple waiting area filled with local patients, past examination rooms where she glimpsed modern medical equipment that seemed out of place in such a rural setting. At the back of the clinic, a door opened to a private office, and there, older, greyer, with lines etched deeply around his eyes but unmistakably alive, stood her father. The reunion was nothing like the tearful, joyful scenario Emily had imagined countless times over the years. James Harrington looked at his daughter with a complex mixture of emotions, love and shame predominant among them. "I never wanted you to find me," were his first words to her. Not "I missed you" or "I'm sorry," or any of the things a father should say to the daughter he abandoned. The coldness of the statement struck Emily like a physical blow, but before she could respond, he added more softly, "Because I knew once you did, you would be in danger too." He looked different, thinner, weathered, with a beard now flecked with grey, but his eyes were the same, and when he finally, hesitantly embraced her, he smelled the same, antiseptic soap mixed with the faint coffee scent that had always clung to him. Over the next several hours, in that small office with the sounds of the clinic operating around them, James told Emily a story so extraordinary she might not have believed it from anyone else. The humanitarian mission to Sudan had been real, but it had also been cover for another operation. For years before his death, James had been working with a specialized division of the CIA, using his medical missions as opportunities to gather intelligence in conflict zones. It had started innocently enough, being asked to report on the types of weapons causing the injuries he treated, then escalating to observing troop movements, identifying high-value targets receiving medical care, and eventually carrying specialized equipment disguised as medical devices. "I was patriotic and naive," he told her. "I believed I was helping prevent larger conflicts, saving more lives in the long run. But in Sudan, something had gone wrong. He had discovered evidence that the intelligence he'd been gathering wasn't being used for defensive purposes as he'd been told. but was directly leading to drone strikes and special operations that were killing not just combatants, but civilians, including medical personnel from other aid organizations. I was being used to target the very people I had sworn to help, he said, the self-loathing evident in his voice. When I threatened to expose what was happening, I became a liability. The attack on the hospital hadn't been by local forces, as reported. It had been a staged operation designed to eliminate James while making it look like collateral damage in the regional conflict. He had been warned minutes before by a sympathetic colleague within the agency, just enough time to grab his medical bag and escape through a maintenance tunnel. The 5 who died were real casualties, collateral damage in an operation aimed primarily at silencing him. I didn't know about the attack plan in advance, he insisted, seeing the horror in Emily's face. I would have warned them, evacuated the hospital. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late for everyone but me. With the help of local contacts, James had made it to the small airstrip and chartered a plane to Egypt, then disappeared using connections and resources he'd established during his years of clandestine work. He had been living under various identities since then, always working as a doctor but in remote areas, moving whenever he felt he might be recognized. I couldn't come back, Emily. They would have either killed me for real or imprisoned me as a traitor. And if I contacted you, they would have used you to get to me. But why risk creating an Instagram account now? Emily asked. After all these years of hiding, James looked away, and for the first time she noticed how thin he had become, the slight tremor in his hands. I'm sick, Emily. Pancreatic cancer, advanced stage. I don't have much time left, maybe 6 months. I was weak. I wanted to see if you were okay, to catch some glimpse of your life before I died for real. The account was supposed to be anonymous, untraceable. I never posted my face, never used real-time locations. But I got careless with that last photo, the one showing my scar. I forgot how well you knew my body, the marks on it. Emily felt a surge of anger cutting through her shock. You let me think you were dead for 12 years. I grieved you, Dad. I cried myself to sleep for months. I had no one. You had Richard, James said quietly. He promised to take care of you. Richard knows you're alive. The betrayal struck Emily anew. All those years of Richard's support and guidance, had it all been monitoring rather than mentoring? Richard knows some of it, not where I've been or what I've been doing. Just that I didn't die in Sudan and that I couldn't come back. He agreed to be the trustee for the insurance money, to make sure you were provided for. He's been protecting you, Emily. We both have. By lying to me for my entire adult life? The bitterness in her voice was palpable. James closed his eyes briefly. You deserved better. You deserved a father who was the man you thought I was, not what I became. As the initial shock wore off, Emily's medical training kicked in. She insisted on seeing his medical records, consulting with the Thai doctor who had been treating him. The diagnosis was accurate: stage 4 pancreatic cancer that had already metastasized to the liver. He had refused more aggressive treatments, opting only for pain management in his final months. I didn't want to die in a hospital, he explained, and I wanted clarity of mind for as long as possible. That night, staying in the small apartment behind the clinic where her father now lived, Emily discovered how thoroughly James had recreated himself in his exile. The walls were lined with photos of patients he had treated across Southeast Asia, children with cleft palates he had repaired, landmine victims fitted with prosthetics, elderly villagers whose cataracts he had removed. He had built a new life of service, trying perhaps to atone for the role he had played, the work that had compromised his ethics as a doctor. In a locked metal box under his bed, she found documents detailing the Sudan operation, insurance against anyone trying to silence him permanently, along with a journal recording names of other doctors who had been recruited as he had been, some who were likely still unwittingly providing intelligence that led to military actions. It was this evidence, James believed, that still made him a target despite the years that had passed. Intelligence agencies had long memories and extensive reach. The organizations implicated in his documents included not just American agencies, but private military contractors and pharmaceutical companies who had used conflict zones to test experimental treatments without oversight or consent. These people don't just disappear or retire, he told Emily. They move to new agencies, new companies, but the networks stay intact. As long as people who were involved in Sudan are still in positions of power, the threat remains. Emily stayed in Thailand for 2 weeks, helping at the clinic during the day and spending evenings with her father, relearning who he was while sharing who she had become. She told him about her nursing career, her specialization in emergency medicine that had been inspired by him, the volunteer work she had begun with refugee health programs in Portland. Despite everything, despite the anger that still surfaced in waves, they found their way back to some shadow of their former closeness. James taught her medical techniques he had developed for resource-limited settings. She showed him photos of her life, her friends, her graduation. They grieved together for the years they had lost. As her departure date approached, Emily faced an impossible decision. Her father wanted her to return to her life in Portland, to maintain the fiction of his death for her own safety. She wanted him to return with her, to face whatever consequences awaited him, but with proper legal representation and the full story made public. The people who tried to kill you once will want to finish the job if you surface now, she argued. At least in the US, with media attention and legal protection, you'd have a chance. And you would be collateral damage, James countered. Your career, your safety, they would all be compromised. I've lived with my choices, Emily. Let me die with them too. The compromise they reached was imperfect, but the best they could manage under the circumstances. Emily would return to Portland and quietly consult with a trusted investigative journalist, sharing redacted versions of her father's documents that implicated the systems but protected specific names until proper legal safeguards could be put in place. James would relocate to a new clinic deeper in the Thai countryside, continuing his work until his health no longer permitted it. They would communicate through encrypted channels, with Emily planning to return when his condition worsened. It wasn't the reunion either had imagined, but it was something real after 12 years of lies and separation. The most difficult conversation came the night before Emily's departure, when she finally asked the question that had haunted her from the moment she saw her father alive. If there had been no Instagram mistake, if I hadn't found you by chance, would you have died here without ever telling me you were alive? James looked at his daughter for a long moment, his eyes filling with tears for the first time since their reunion. I'd like to say no, he finally answered. I'd like to say I would have found the courage to reach out before the end. But the truth is, I don't know. I've been a coward in so many ways, Emily. I told myself I was protecting you, but maybe I was just protecting myself from having to face you, from having to explain how far I fell from being the father you deserved. Emily's return to Portland was surreal, stepping back into her apartment, her job, her routines while carrying the knowledge that everything she had believed for 12 years was a lie. She waited 3 days before contacting Richard, using the time to secure her father's documents in a safe deposit box and make contact with Catherine Sato, an investigative journalist known for her work exposing government overreach in intelligence operations. When she finally met Richard for coffee, she said nothing about Thailand, nothing about her father. Instead, she asked pointed questions about the trust, requesting to see the original insurance documents for a financial planning consultation. She watched his face carefully as he deflected, making excuses about the papers being in storage. There was nervousness there, but also what seemed like genuine concern for her. 2 nights later, Emily's apartment was broken into while she was working a night shift. Nothing obvious was taken, but she could tell someone had searched methodically through her belongings. The next day, she noticed a black SUV parked across from the hospital during her entire shift. When she left through a side entrance, the vehicle pulled out, following at a distance. The message was clear: she was being watched. Moving quickly, she implemented the contingency plan she and her father had developed. She took an immediate leave of absence from the hospital, citing family emergency, and withdrew the cash she had been saving for a down payment on a condo. Within 48 hours, she had disappeared from Portland, just as thoroughly as her father had disappeared from Sudan 12 years earlier. Catherine Sato published the first article in her investigative series 3 months later. Titled The Hippocratic Violation: How America Weaponized Its Humanitarian Doctors, it detailed a decades-long program of intelligence agencies recruiting physicians working in conflict zones, using their humanitarian cover to gather targeting intelligence. Without naming James directly, it referenced a prominent American surgeon who faked his own death after discovering his medical intelligence had led to the bombing of a school misidentified as a militant training camp. The article included redacted documents showing the authorization chain for such operations, implicating officials across multiple administrations. The public reaction was immediate and intense, with congressional hearings announced within a week of publication. From a small town in New Zealand, using a secure connection in a library, Emily watched the story unfold through news websites and encrypted messages from Catherine. The journalist had become the public face of the investigation, while Emily remained anonymous. A family member of one of the physicians involved, who had provided the initial documentation. The intelligence community responded with predictable denials, but as more doctors came forward with their own experiences of recruitment and manipulation, the evidence became too substantial to dismiss entirely. Richard Lowe was called to testify before Congress regarding the trust arrangement for James Harrington's life insurance policy. Under oath, he admitted knowing that James hadn't died in Sudan, but insisted he had no knowledge of the intelligence operations. "I only knew my friend was in trouble and asked me to protect his daughter," he stated in testimony that was broadcast nationally. "Everything I did was to keep Emily safe while honoring my promise to her father." Emily watched his testimony with mixed emotions, anger at his deception, but recognition of the impossible position her father had put him in. James Harrington never saw the impact of the revelations. He died in a small rural hospital in northern Thailand 4 months after Emily's visit. His body ravaged by the cancer, but his mind clear until near the end. A local doctor who had worked with him contacted Emily through their prearranged emergency protocol, allowing her to speak with her father one last time via an encrypted video call. "I'm proud of you," were among his final words to her. "You had the courage I lacked." He was buried under his assumed name in a simple ceremony attended by local villagers whose lives he had touched during his years in exile. The full congressional investigation took nearly 2 years, resulting in formal censures, early retirements, and reorganization of several intelligence oversight mechanisms. 3 pharmaceutical companies faced substantial fines for ethics violations related to undocumented testing in conflict zones. Catherine Sato won a Pulitzer for her reporting. But for Emily Harrington, the most significant outcome was more personal. The official amendment of her father's death certificate, acknowledging that James Taylor Harrington had not died in Sudan in 2013, but had lived until 2025, dying of natural causes in Thailand. This legal recognition of the truth, incomplete as it was, allowed Emily to finally mourn her father properly, not the man she had lost as a teenager, but the complicated, flawed, ultimately brave man she had come to know at the end of his life. Emily returned to Portland 2 years after her father's actual death, resuming her nursing career with a new focus on ethics in healthcare. She established a small foundation in her father's name, dedicated to providing medical training to healthcare workers in conflict zones while advocating for strict neutrality protocols. The trust that Richard had managed was rolled into this foundation, transforming the proceeds of deception into a force for transparency and healing. She maintained a cautious relationship with Richard, neither fully forgiving his role in the deception nor cutting him from her life entirely. "Your father saved countless lives both before and after Sudan," Richard told her during one difficult conversation. "Whatever mistakes he made, whatever lines he crossed, that truth remains." Emily came to accept this complex legacy, that her father had been both compromised and redemptive, both deceiver and healer. The Instagram account that had started everything was long gone, its momentary existence having changed everything. A digital ghost that had revealed a real one. The story of James Harrington eventually became public enough that a small memorial was added to the physician's memorial wall at Portland General, acknowledging both his service as a surgeon and his courageous stand for medical neutrality in conflict zones. The plaque made no mention of intelligence work or faked deaths. Such complexities rarely fit within institutional narratives, but Emily didn't mind the omission. She knew the full story, had made her peace with it, and had ensured the essential truth was preserved in the ways that mattered. On the anniversary of finding her father's Instagram account, Emily created a private account of her own. She posted just one photo, the sunset in Bali that had started everything, which she had traveled to recreate from the same spot where her father had stood. The caption read simply, "Some journeys begin where you think the story has ended." The account had no followers, sought none, and would be deleted after 24 hours. Some conversations, Emily had learned, are meant only for ghosts. Perhaps the most haunting question in Emily's mind wasn't about her father's deception, but about the flawed systems that had corrupted a good man. How many other humanitarian missions around the world were covers for intelligence operations? How many other doctors who took oaths to heal were being manipulated into providing targeting information? The implications stretched beyond one man's moral compromise to questions about the very nature of humanitarian work in conflict zones. When medical neutrality becomes weaponized, who can the vulnerable trust? When those sworn to help become unwitting instruments of harm, how does healing happen? In the years that followed her father's death, Emily dedicated herself to creating better systems of accountability. She worked with international medical organizations to establish strict protocols for avoiding intelligence entanglements. She advocated for transparent funding structures that couldn't be infiltrated by covert operations. And she told her story, anonymously at first, then eventually under her own name, to medical students and humanitarian workers, warning them about the subtle ways ethical compromises begin. The Instagram photo that had started her journey became a symbol for her, a reminder that truth can hide in plain sight, visible only to those who know exactly what to look for. The peculiar scar, the distinctive stance, the little details that only a daughter would recognize. In a world of digital personas and carefully constructed images, sometimes the smallest authentic detail can break through. The algorithm that had suggested her father's account had been operating on patterns and similarities she couldn't comprehend. Perhaps picking up on genetic similarities in their features, shared locations they had both visited, or mutual connections too distant to notice. Whatever the digital breadcrumbs had been, they had led her to a truth technology itself couldn't understand. The unbreakable connection between a father and daughter, even across 12 years of silence. What haunted Emily most in quiet moments wasn't anger at her father's deception, but rather the imagination of what might have been. If he had chosen differently in Sudan, if he had refused to gather intelligence from the beginning, if he had gone public with his concerns rather than running, if he had found a way to include her in his new life sooner, how different would both their lives have been? The parallel timeline where James Harrington had chosen courage earlier hovered like a ghost beside her actual life, not as a torment, but as a reminder that ethical choices rarely come with clear signposts, and that good people can make catastrophic choices one small step at a time. In the end, Emily made peace with the contradiction her father represented, that he had been both courageous and cowardly, both principled and compromised, both the hero of her childhood and the flawed man who had abandoned her. The pandemic that swept the world in 2020 had prevented her from traveling to see him one final time before his death, adding another layer of complicated grief to their story. But the foundation she established in his name became her way of honoring both versions of her father, supporting medical work in conflict zones while simultaneously advocating for transparency, ethics, and true neutrality for healthcare workers worldwide. On what would have been James Harrington's 60th birthday, Emily returned to their old home in Portland. The new owners, learning of the connection, kindly allowed her to visit the backyard where she and her father had planted a small garden together the spring before his last mission. The rose bushes they had planted were still there, wild and overgrown, but stubbornly blooming. Emily sat beside them, thinking about how life persists despite abandonment, how beauty emerges from neglect. It seemed an apt metaphor for her own journey. How she had grown not despite the absence of her father, but partly because of it, becoming resilient in ways she might never have been otherwise. That evening, she opened a small safety deposit box containing the final items from her father that she had brought back from Thailand. Among them was a journal he had kept during his years in exile, documenting not just his ongoing medical work, but his thoughts about Emily, wondering what she was doing on her birthdays, imagining her graduation, hoping she was happy. The entries revealed that he had in fact checked on her periodically throughout the years, watching from a distance as she built her life. There were details that chilled her. He had been there in disguise at her nursing school graduation, standing at the back of the auditorium. He had once been seated 2 tables away when she celebrated a birthday at her favorite restaurant. He had never fully abandoned her watch, even as he had abandoned her life. The final pages of the journal contained something unexpected. Letters addressed to Emily but never sent, one for each year he had been gone. Unlike the structured, careful letters he had left before his mission, these were raw and honest. They documented his internal struggles, his recognition of the damage his choices had caused, his pride in watching the woman she became. The final entry, dated just weeks before she found his Instagram account, read simply, "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope someday you'll understand that every choice I made, even the worst ones, began with love for you. Protecting you was the only pure motive I've ever had." It was Richard who eventually explained the full context of James's choices. Once the congressional investigations were complete and the statute of limitations had passed on certain classified operations, Richard shared what he knew. James had indeed been recruited by intelligence services, but the pivotal moment came when they had subtly threatened Emily's safety if James didn't cooperate. "They never made explicit threats," Richard explained during a long conversation at his lake house, where he had retired after the hearings. "That's not how these people operate. It was all insinuation, casual mentions of your college schedule, your jogging route, how vulnerable young women are in big cities." James understood exactly what they were implying. He felt trapped. The staged death had been James's desperate solution, a way to sever his connection to the intelligence world while eliminating any reason for them to maintain interest in Emily. With James dead and his knowledge presumably buried with him, Emily would no longer be leverage. The insurance payout managed by Richard was meant to give her financial security, while James built a new identity far from anyone who might recognize him. In his mind, he was making the ultimate sacrifice, giving up his life with his daughter to ensure her safety. This revelation forced Emily to reconsider everything. The father she had mourned, then found, then lost again, had been operating from love, however misguided. The choices that had caused her years of grief had been made in a desperate attempt to protect her. It didn't erase the pain or fully absolve him, but it recontextualized their story. The villain in this tale wasn't James, but the shadowy systems that had exploited a father's love for his daughter, turning family bonds into vulnerabilities to be manipulated. 3 years after her father's actual death, Emily was invited to speak at a conference on medical ethics in conflict zones. Standing before an audience of doctors, aid workers, and policymakers, she shared a carefully edited version of her father's story, not as a personal confession, but as a cautionary tale about the infiltration of humanitarian work by intelligence operations. She didn't mention the Instagram photo that had started her journey, keeping that detail private, a small piece of the story that remained just between her and her father. "Humanitarian work must be truly neutral to be effective," she told the audience. "When doctors become unwitting intelligence assets, when medical care becomes a cover for military objectives, we betray the very principles of healing. My father learned this too late, at terrible personal cost." The speech was recorded and shared widely within medical humanitarian circles, becoming a cornerstone of training for doctors deploying to conflict zones. Emily never remarried, though she had serious relationships over the years. The trust issues stemming from her father's deception took years of therapy to address, but she found her purpose in her dual mission, working as an emergency medicine specialist while advocating for ethical boundaries in humanitarian aid. She traveled extensively, consulting with Doctors Without Borders and other organizations to help them establish protocols for avoiding intelligence entanglements. Her father's journals became her guide, the hard-won wisdom from his mistakes helping her navigate the complex ethical landscape. On the 10th anniversary of finding that Instagram photo, Emily was working in a refugee camp on the Thai-Myanmar border, not far from the clinic where she had reunited with her father. During a break between shifts, she climbed a nearby hill that overlooked the camp and the lush countryside beyond. She took out her phone and scrolled to a photo she kept hidden in a locked app, the screenshot of her father's Instagram post, the one showing his distinctive scar. She had kept it all these years, a digital artifact of the moment her life had changed forever. As she stood there, a young doctor from the camp joined her, asking about her background and how she had come to specialize in refugee medicine. Emily considered the sanitized version of her story she usually shared, then looked at the young, idealistic face before her and decided on honesty instead. "It started with an Instagram photo," she began, "of a man I thought was dead, and there, on a hillside in Thailand, Emily shared the full unvarnished story of her father, his work, his compromise, his flight, his redemption." The young doctor listened without interruption, and when Emily finished, asked only one question. "Do you think he made the right choice in the end?" Emily looked out over the camp, where hundreds of displaced people were receiving care from doctors, who had committed themselves to healing without political agenda. "I think he made the only choice he could see at the time," she answered. "But his story helps us see more choices, better choices. That's his legacy." The sun was setting as they walked back down to the camp, casting long shadows across the temporary structures and the people moving between them. Emily thought about how a single image had changed her life, a partial view of a man with his back turned, hiding his face but revealing just enough to be recognized by the one person who knew exactly what to look for. In a world of curated online personas and digital disguises, it had been the most human of connections, a daughter recognizing her father by the marks life had left on him that had broken through the deception. That night, as she prepared for her next shift, Emily received a message from Richard. Now in his 80s, he rarely traveled but remained a steady presence in her life. "Found something in an old box that belongs to you," the message read. Attached was a photo of a small leather pouch with her father's initials. "He gave this to me the day before his last mission. Said if anything happened to him, I should keep it until you were ready. I think now is the time." Emily stared at the image, another piece of her father's puzzle emerging after all these years. She typed back, "I'll be in Portland next month. Save it for me." Whatever secrets the pouch contained, more confessions, more explanations, perhaps even information about others caught in the same web as her father, she would face them. After everything, she was no longer afraid of difficult truths. As she slipped her phone back into her pocket and prepared for her night shift at the camp, Emily thought about her father's last Instagram photo, the sunset in Bali, the moment of carelessness that had revealed him to her. She wondered if it had truly been carelessness, or if, conscious or not, he had wanted to be found. Perhaps it had been his version of a message in a bottle, cast into the digital ocean with the faintest hope that it might somehow reach her. A last attempt at connection from a dying man who had lost everything else. The clinic was filling with patients as night fell, children with fevers, an elderly man with respiratory distress, a pregnant woman in early labor. Emily moved between them with practiced efficiency, her hands steady, her mind clear. This was her father's true inheritance to her, not the foundation in his name or the journal of his regrets, but the calling to heal, to be present for others in their moments of vulnerability. Whatever else James Harrington had been, spy, fugitive, deceptor, he had also been a healer. In continuing that work, Emily honored the best part of him. And so the story that began with an Instagram photo showing a distinctive scar continued in the lives touched by both father and daughter, the patients they treated, the systems they challenged, the ethical boundaries they fought to establish. The digital ghost that had appeared on Emily's screen that rainy Portland evening had led her to difficult truths, painful reunions, and ultimately to her own purpose. In the end, perhaps that was as much resolution as any story could offer. Not a perfect ending, but a meaningful continuation. The final entry in Emily's own journal, written late that night after her shift ended, read simply, "Found and lost and found again. The story never ends where we think it does." Beside these words, she pasted a small printout of the Instagram photo that had started everything, her father's silhouette against a Bali sunset, his scarred shoulder just visible enough to be recognized by the one person in the world who had traced that scar with childish fingers while listening to bedtime stories about adventure. In the years that followed, Emily would continue her dual work of healing bodies and strengthening ethical boundaries in humanitarian medicine. The foundation established in her father's name would grow to support doctors working in conflict zones who refused intelligence entanglements. Richard would eventually pass away peacefully at 87, having witnessed the positive transformation of James's complicated legacy. And the story of the doctor who disappeared would be told in careful, redacted versions in ethics classes for medical students, a case study in how good intentions can be corrupted and how redemption sometimes comes through unexpected channels. But for Emily, the most important part of the story was the simplest. A daughter had found her father, and in doing so, had found herself. Everything else, the geopolitics, the intelligence operations, the ethical debates, was context for that central human narrative of loss and recovery, deception and truth, abandonment and return. The Instagram algorithm that had suggested her father's anonymous account had been operating on digital logic, but it had stumbled upon something algorithms could never fully comprehend: the unbreakable connection between parent and child, visible only in the smallest details, that love remembers. As Emily drove back to the refugee camp after visiting Portland to collect her father's leather pouch, she thought about the strange path her life had taken. The pouch had contained exactly what she had expected: more pages from her father's journals, more pieces of his story, more context for his choices. But it had also held something unexpected: a small flash drive with files documenting other doctors who had been recruited as her father had been, many still working in the field, unknowingly compromising their medical neutrality. It was both a burden and a gift. Information that could protect others from her father's fate, but that also placed responsibility on her shoulders. She had made copies of the files, secured them in multiple locations, and begun the careful process of reaching out to the doctors named, not with accusations, but with questions designed to help them recognize if they were being used as her father had been. It was delicate, dangerous work, but it felt right, a continuation of both her father's redemptive final years and her own commitment to protecting the integrity of humanitarian medicine. The road to the camp wound through lush hills, the same landscape her father had navigated during his years in exile. Emily wondered if he had driven this same road, seen these same views, perhaps even treated patients in this same camp. Their paths had converged and diverged, separated by time but united by purpose. The Instagram photo that had brought her to Thailand the first time was long gone from any server, deleted years ago, but it remained vivid in her memory, the beginning of a journey that continued to unfold. As she parked at the camp and prepared for another day of treating those in need, Emily thought about the nature of identity in the digital age. Her father had believed he could disappear completely, erase James Harrington, and become someone new. But in the end, it had been impossible. Not because of digital footprints or facial recognition, but because of the unique markers of humanity that no technology could fully capture or disguise. The scar that told a childhood story, the distinctive way he stood watching a sunset, the small details that only love would recognize. In a world increasingly defined by digital personas and artificial connections, it had been this most human of recognitions that had broken through the deception. And perhaps that was the final lesson of her father's story, that beneath the layers of identity we construct, online and off, there remains something essentially recognizable to those who truly know us, something that cannot be hidden or erased, something that, like Emily's discovery of her father's distinctive scar in an anonymous Instagram photo, waits to be recognized by the right person at the right moment.